Everyone in the London Ton said the same thing about Barnaby Pottinger, Earl of Bloxley. They said he was not man enough. They said he was too bookish, too gentle, and better with ledgers than with lovers. And when Miranda Locke returned from her disastrous season and began accepting his invitations, those whispers grew sharper than ever. If you're listening right now, do me a huge favor and help prove my skeptical aunt wrong. She swore this channel wouldn't even hit 500 subscribers because who wants old-fashioned romance these days? But I know stories like this, full of heart and quiet fire, deserve to reach every hidden romantic out there. Smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a quick comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Country Manor, Cozy City Flat, or Carriage Ride. It truly helps bring more tales like this to you. Miranda Locke never planned to retreat to the countryside. For months, she told herself she belonged in London's glittering ballrooms. The city promised romance, excitement, and a match worthy of her family's expectations. Instead, she found empty flattery, calculating suitors, and a hollowness that shadowed every dance. One morning, weary of pretense and disappointment, she ordered her trunks packed and departed for her family's estate in the quiet hills beyond the city's reach. The countryside greeted her like it always had. The old chapel still stood against the horizon. The village inn still served warm cider with the same crooked smile from Mrs. Hewitt. Carriages rolled gently past meadows where sheep grazed, as if time itself moved at a kinder pace. Miranda breathed deeply without meaning to. The air tasted sweeter here, honest and unhurried. She had not changed her circumstances, but something within her had shifted. She felt steadier, clearer, and ready to trust her own judgment again. She settled into the family manor with its familiar creaking floors and sun-warmed libraries. Dust motes danced in afternoon light, and memories lingered in every corner. Neighbors called with flowers and carefully polite questions, asking how long she intended to stay. Miranda smiled and said she was not certain, though something deep within her already whispered that she had come home to herself. A fortnight later, she saw him. Barnaby Pottinger stepped into the village assembly rooms wearing a perfectly tailored black coat and an understated cravat. He looked taller than she remembered from their brief introductions years ago, broader through the shoulders beneath that dark wool, with a short beard framing a thoughtful face and a top hat held respectfully in his hand. He moved with quiet purpose, nodding courteously to the local families. Miranda felt an unexpected pull in her chest. She had not anticipated old impressions rising so swiftly. Barnaby had been spoken of even then as the scholarly Earl, the one who managed his estates with care and never caused scandal. She remembered hearing he spent more time in his library than at Carlton House, preferring account books to cards. When he turned and his dark eyes found hers across the room, something flickered there, a depth that made the space between them feel charged. "Miss Locke," he said quietly, as if confirming she was truly there before him. "Lord Bloxley," she replied, "it has been some time." He inclined his head without breaking her gaze. The small gesture held more respect than all the flowery bows she had endured in London. They spoke of simple matters, her return, the estate, his work improving tenant cottages. Barnaby listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight and sincerity. There was nothing weak about him, nothing uncertain. After he excused himself to speak with the vicar, Lady Ashworth leaned closer with knowing eyes. "He is a finer man than most realize," she murmured. "The Ton judges too quickly what it does not understand." Miranda watched him across the room and felt something she had not felt in London's grandest ballrooms, curiosity, and something deeper still, stirring beneath the surface like a promise waiting to be kept. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Miranda had forgotten existed. She woke to bird song instead of carriage wheels, took her morning chocolate in the sunlit breakfast room overlooking gardens that had grown wilder in her absence, and walked the estate grounds without the suffocating weight of a chaperone's watchful eye. London felt like a fever dream now, all those glittering assemblies where young men spoke of nothing but their tailors and hunters, where every smile calculated advantage and every dance measured wealth. She had wanted to belong there once, had believed the city held everything a woman of sense should desire, but 3 months among the Tun's eligible bachelors had taught her a bitter lesson. Lord Pemberton spoke only of his own consequence. Mr. Hartley's compliments were rehearsed and hollow. Even the supposedly charming Viscount Ashford had looked past her while declaring his admiration, his eyes already searching the ballroom for wealthier prospects. Miranda had smiled through it all, playing the part expected of her, until one morning she woke unable to bear another moment of the charade. The countryside offered what London never could: honesty. The ancient oaks did not pretend to be something they were not. The stream running through the lower meadow followed its course without artifice. Even the tenants who tipped their hats to her spoke plainly, their respect given freely rather than bartered for advantage. She spent her afternoons in the Manor's library, a room her father had loved, with its leather-bound volumes and the faint smell of pipe tobacco still clinging to the curtains. She read poetry, tried her hand at watercolors, and allowed herself to simply breathe without performance or pretense. It was during one of these walks, 3 weeks after her return, that she encountered him again. The path through the east woods opened onto a vista overlooking the valley, and there stood Barnaby Pottinger, Earl of Bloxley, his horse grazing nearby. He had removed his top hat, and the afternoon sun caught the dark strands of his hair. His black coat was unbuttoned, cravat loosened slightly as if he too had sought escape from formality. He stood perfectly still, gazing at the landscape with an intensity that suggested he was reading it the way other men read ledgers, seeing beneath the surface to something deeper. Miranda's breath caught. She had thought of him more than once since the assembly, his quiet words echoing in her mind at odd moments. Now, seeing him alone and unguarded, she glimpsed something the Tun's gossips would never see. There was nothing weak in his stillness. It was the quiet of deep water, of strength held in reserve. He turned, sensing her presence, and their eyes met across the clearing. For a moment neither spoke. The world narrowed to the space between them, charged with recognition and something unnamed. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the sudden certainty that this man saw her, truly saw her, in a way no London suitor ever had. "Miss Locke?" he said, his voice low and steady. "Lord Bloxley." She stepped forward, drawn by a pull she could not name. Yet in that brief glance, Miranda felt a pull she couldn't ignore. What secrets hid behind his reserved facade? And why did standing here in the quiet woods with this misunderstood Earl feel more thrilling than any ballroom had ever been? The village assembly the following week should have been a simple affair. Miranda attended with her mother, expecting nothing more than country dances and pleasant conversation. Instead, she found herself thrust back into the very world she had fled, the world of whispers and cruel judgments masked as concern. Lady Thornbury arrived with her daughter and a tongue sharpened by years of society intrigue. Miranda was adjusting her gloves near the refreshment table when their voices drifted over, clear and cutting despite their affected discretion. "Poor Lord Bloxley," Lady Thornbury sighed with false sympathy. "Such a waste of a title, really. A man that bookish has no business attempting marriage. Can you imagine? More comfortable with his ledgers than with a woman, not man enough to satisfy any bride with proper expectations." Her daughter tittered behind her fan. "Mama, you mustn't say such things aloud." "It is only honesty, my dear. The man lacks vigor, lacks fire, too gentle by half, too scholarly. A wife would wither from neglect, poor thing. Mark my words, he will die a bachelor, and the title will pass to some distant cousin with more spine." Miranda's fingers tightened around her glass. The casual cruelty, the presumption, it was everything she had grown to despise about the Tun's judgment. These women knew nothing of Barnaby Pottinger beyond what gossip fed them, yet they spoke of him as if his character were already written and sealed. Across the room, the subject of their derision entered quietly. Barnaby moved through the assembly with his characteristic reserve, acknowledging greetings with polite nods, his dark eyes taking in the room without urgency. He wore the same impeccable black coat, his cravat tied with precision, but not vanity. Everything about him spoke of restraint, of dignity held close. Miranda watched as old Mr. Davies, the village apothecary, approached him with visible distress. The elderly man's hands shook as he spoke, his voice too low to carry. But Barnaby's response was immediate. He placed a steadying hand on the apothecary's shoulder, leaning in to listen with complete attention. His expression shifted from concern to understanding, and then he guided Mr. Davies to a quieter corner, speaking in low, earnest tones that seemed to ease the older man's agitation. When a solution was apparently reached, Barnaby produced a card from his pocket, writing something upon it before pressing it into Mr. Davies' hand. The apothecary's eyes glistened with gratitude, and he clasped Barnaby's hand between both of his own, the gesture speaking volumes. Miranda felt something fierce kindle in her chest. This was the man they dismissed as too gentle? This man who set aside his own evening to ease another's burden, who listened with his whole attention when half the room barely acknowledged the apothecary's existence. The profound injustice of their words struck her like a physical blow. She thought of London's so-called passionate suitors, men who spoke loudly of their exploits, who paraded their desires like credentials. But what had any of them offered beyond empty flourishes? Barnaby's quiet kindness held more genuine strength than all their bluster combined. He caught her eye across the room, and for a moment something unguarded passed between them. Then he inclined his head with that same understated respect and returned his attention to the assembly, unaware of the gossip swirling in his wake, unaware that she was beginning to see him with entirely new eyes. As she watched him extend a thoughtful hand to another elderly guest, steadying her descent from a step, Miranda wondered, could anyone truly know the fire beneath such calm, or did society's noise drown out the very qualities that made a man truly worthy? Their paths crossed more frequently after that evening, though whether by chance or design, Miranda could not say. She encountered Barnaby on her morning walks, riding the boundaries of his estate which bordered her family's lands. He would tip his hat, she would nod in return, and sometimes they would fall into step together, their horses moving in companionable rhythm along the old bridleways. The silences between them felt different from the strained quiet of London drawing rooms. Here, silence was not awkwardness, but understanding, a shared appreciation for the morning mist rising off the meadows, the distant call of wood pigeons, the way sunlight broke through ancient oak branches. Miranda found herself more at ease in these wordless moments than she had been in a dozen verbose courtships. When they did speak, Barnaby's words carried weight. He did not speak to fill space or impress, but to share what genuinely moved him. One afternoon, as they paused near the stone bridge crossing the brook, he gestured toward the fields beyond. "I have been working with the tenants to rotate crops more effectively," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The land has been generous, but we must be wise stewards. Mr. Pemberton, my estate manager, believed it impossible, but the soil is already recovering. In another season, we shall see the difference." Miranda heard the quiet pride beneath his measured tone. "You care deeply for your lands." "They are not merely mine," he replied, meeting her eyes. "They belong to those who work them, who depend upon them. A title is only as worthy as the care one takes with what it entails." She thought of London peers who spoke of their estates as assets to be exploited, numbers in a ledger to fund their pleasures. Barnaby spoke of his as a living trust, something to nurture and protect. Another evening, they met by chance in the village lending library. Barnaby stood before the poetry section, a volume of Wordsworth open in his hands. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his expression, pleasure, perhaps, at seeing her. "Do you read poetry, Lord Bloxley?" Miranda asked, moving closer. "When time permits." He showed her the page. "This particular piece speaks of finding truth in nature's quieter moments. I find it clarifying." She read the lines he indicated, aware of his nearness, the warmth of him beside her in the fading afternoon light. "Society often mistakes silence for emptiness." His dark eyes found hers, intense and searching. "And yet silence can hold more than 1,000 hollow words." The moments stretched between them, charged with meaning neither dared name aloud. The library keeper lit the evening lanterns, and golden light pooled around them, softening the edges of the world. They walked back together through the village as twilight settled over the countryside. Barnaby spoke of books he loved, of his hope to establish a school for tenant children, of small dreams that revealed depths the tongue would never imagine. His voice softened in the gathering dusk, losing some of its formal reserve, and Miranda glimpsed something beneath, a passion carefully guarded, a fire banked but not extinguished. In the lantern glow of evening, his voice softened with each shared confidence, and Miranda wondered, would she be the one to draw out the passion society claimed he lacked, or had they been blind all along to the intensity that burned steady and true beneath his quiet grace? The garden party at Thornbury Hall should have been pleasant. Instead, it became the battleground where Miranda could no longer remain silent. She stood near the rose arbor, ostensibly admiring the blooms, when Lady Pemberton's voice carried across the hedgerow with deliberate clarity. "I hear Miss Locke has been seen walking with Lord Bloxley. Poor girl must be desperate indeed if she is settling for that." "Quite tragic," another voice agreed. "A woman of her vitality wasted on a man who barely qualifies as one. He will bore her to tears within a month. Mark my words, the Earl lacks the essential fire required to keep any woman satisfied." Miranda's blood turned hot. She stepped around the hedge, her voice cool and precise. "I find it curious, Lady Pemberton, that you claim such intimate knowledge of Lord Bloxley's character when I have observed you exchange no more than passing greetings with him. Perhaps true discernment requires more than gossip and presumption." The women's faces colored, but Miranda did not wait for their sputtering response. She walked away with her head high, heart hammering, knowing she had just aligned herself publicly with a man society had condemned. She found Barnaby later on the terrace, standing apart from the gathering, his profile etched against the evening sky. He turned as she approached, and something in his expression told her he had heard what she had done. "You should not have defended me," he said quietly. "It will only direct their venom toward you." "Let them talk." Miranda moved closer, lowering her voice. "I cannot abide such cruelty masquerading as concern." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a vulnerability that made her chest tighten, he spoke. "They have always spoken thus, too scholarly, too gentle, not man enough, as if kindness were weakness, as if thoughtfulness were failure. I have tried to prove them wrong, tried to be what they expected, but He paused, jaw tightening. I fear they will never see past their judgment, that I am doomed to eternal misunderstanding." Miranda heard the quiet pain beneath his words, the weight of years spent bearing unfair judgment in silence. She understood then how deeply silence could wound, how cruelty left unchallenged became a prison. "They see only what they wish to see," Miranda said fiercely. "But I see you, Lord Bloxley. I see a man of depth and principle, whose strength lies not in bluster but in constancy. Their blindness does not diminish your worth." He looked at her then with such intensity that she felt the air shift between them. Slowly, tentatively, he reached for her hand. His fingers, warm and steady, closed around hers with a gentleness that somehow conveyed more strength than any forceful grip ever could. "You truly believe that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I know it." She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses earned from managing his estates, the strength held carefully in check. "The question is whether you believe it." Something changed in his expression, a wall crumbling, a door opening. The distance he had maintained, that protective reserve, began to dissolve. Standing there with her hand in his, their connection deepened into something unshakable, forged in mutual understanding and defiant trust. With her hand in his, something shifted irrevocably between them, and Miranda dared to wonder, could they claim a future the Ton deemed impossible? And would their bond prove strong enough to silence the whispers once and for all? The weeks that followed transformed their careful friendship into something far deeper. Barnaby called at the manor with increasing frequency, bringing books he thought Miranda might enjoy, discussing estate matters with her father, and lingering in the garden where they could speak without the weight of watchful eyes. Their conversations grew longer, more intimate, filled with laughter and comfortable silence in equal measure. Miranda found herself waiting for his visits, her heart quickening at the sound of hoofbeats on the drive. She noticed small things, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, how his reserved demeanor gentled further in her presence, the careful attention he paid to her every word, as if each one mattered. This was not the performative courtship of London ballrooms. This was something real, built on understanding and genuine regard. One evening, as autumn painted the countryside in amber and gold, Barnaby asked if she would walk with him through the estate grounds. The moon hung full and luminous above them, silvering the ancient oaks and casting long shadows across the lawn. They walked in silence until they reached the old stone folly overlooking the valley, where the world seemed to fall away into quiet beauty. Barnaby stopped, turning to face her. Moonlight caught the planes of his face, revealing something vulnerable and determined in his expression. He took both her hands in his, and she felt them tremble slightly. "Miranda," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I am not the man society expects. I cannot offer passionate declarations or grand romantic gestures, but I can offer you honesty, constancy, and a devotion that will not waver. You have seen me as no one else has, not the rumors or the judgments, but the man I truly am." He paused, drawing a steadying breath. "I love you. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bloomed in Miranda's chest, so fierce and sudden it stole her breath. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, Barnaby, with all my heart, yes." He drew her close then, his arms encircling her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with emotion. When he kissed her, it was gentle but not tentative, a promise of depths yet to be discovered, of passion held carefully in reverence rather than abandoned to recklessness. In the days that followed, their engagement became public knowledge, and with it came a fresh wave of whispers. The gossip grew more pointed, more cruel. At the village assembly, Miranda overheard Lady Thornbury's stage whisper, A shame, really. Such a spirited girl wasted on a man who cannot possibly know how to properly satisfy a wife. She will learn soon enough what she has condemned herself to. Miranda lifted her chin and took Barnaby's arm more firmly, feeling his steady strength beside her. Let them talk. She knew what they did not, that true passion was not measured in boastful words or public displays, but in the quiet intensity of a man who loved with his whole being. As rings exchanged in secret promise beneath that same moonlit folly, sealing their vows before the formal ceremony, the Tun's doubts loomed larger than ever. What would their union truly reveal? And would the wedding night prove society's cruel predictions or shatter them beyond repair? The morning of her wedding dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the manor chapel. Miranda stood before the mirror as her mother fastened the last pearl button on her gown, ivory silk that caught the light with every breath. Her golden blonde hair had been arranged in soft waves, threaded with late-season roses from the estate gardens. She looked like a bride should, radiant, hopeful, on the threshold of everything. Yet beneath the joy thrummed an awareness of what waited beyond this day. The whispers had not ceased. If anything, they had intensified as the wedding approached, society's skepticism sharpening into something almost gleeful, as if they anticipated her disappointment. The chapel filled with guests, their faces arranged in polite smiles that did not quite reach their eyes. Lady Thornbury sat in the third pew, her expression a study in false sympathy. Even the younger guests wore expressions of curiosity tinged with pity, as if witnessing a tragedy in its opening act. But then Barnaby appeared at the altar, and everything else fell away. He stood tall in his formal black coat, his cravat tied with meticulous care, his dark eyes finding hers across the chapel with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was nothing uncertain in his bearing, nothing apologetic. He watched her approach with such reverence, such barely contained emotion that she felt tears prick her eyes. The vicar's words washed over them like a blessing. When Barnaby spoke his vows, his voice rang clear and steady through the chapel. I, Barnaby Pottinger, take thee, Miranda Locke, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. The traditional words carried weight beyond their familiarity. Miranda heard the promise beneath them, not just of duty, but of devotion. When her turn came, she spoke with equal conviction, her voice never wavering. The ring slid onto her finger, warm and solid. Barnaby's hand trembled slightly as he held hers, and she squeezed gently, offering reassurance. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Barnaby leaned down to kiss her with such tender intensity that she forgot they were not alone. The wedding breakfast passed in a blur of well-wishes that felt hollow, toasts that rang with subtle mockery. Miranda caught fragments of conversation not meant for her ears, speculation about how quickly disappointment would set in, how soon she would regret her choice, how tragic it was that such a spirited woman had bound herself to inadequacy. She held Barnaby's hand beneath the table, feeling his steady pulse, the warmth of his palm against hers. He met her eyes, and in that glance passed a silent understanding. Tonight would prove what words could not. As the last guests departed and they climbed the stairs to the bridal chamber, the weight of expectation followed them. Door closed, lanterns flickering on her golden blonde waves and his rugged frame, casting intimate shadows across the room. Would this night confirm the whispers or shatter them forever? The bridal chamber glowed softly in candlelight, casting dancing shadows across the fine linens and polished wood. Miranda stood near the window, her heart beating rapidly, not from fear but from anticipation, tinged with the echo of society's cruel predictions. What if they were right? What if this gentle man truly lacked the passion required for marriage? Then Barnaby stepped closer, and she saw his eyes, dark, intense, burning with an emotion so profound it stole her breath. This was not the reserved Earl society dismissed. This was a man who had held back, not from inadequacy, but from reverence, waiting for the right moment, the right woman to reveal the depths within. "Miranda," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. His hands, those careful hands that managed estates and turned pages with precision, reached for her with trembling tenderness. "May I?" She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. What followed was a revelation that shattered every whisper, every cruel assumption. Barnaby's touch was patient yet purposeful, his attention so complete it felt as though nothing existed beyond this room, this moment, this sacred connection between them. His eyes never left hers, reading every response, every quickened breath, adjusting his movements with an attentiveness that spoke of profound care. There was nothing hesitant in his passion. It burned steady and true, like everything about him. Not the flash fire of reckless ardor, but the deep heat of banked coals, all the more powerful for its control. His hands explored with reverent wonder, his kisses deepened with unhurried intensity, and Miranda understood with clarity that pierced her soul. The ton had been catastrophically wrong. This man knew exactly how to cherish a woman. His strength lay not in domination, but in devotion, not in taking, but in giving. He listened to her body as he listened to everything, completely, thoughtfully, responding to every unspoken need with a sensitivity that left her breathless and astonished. When dawn finally crept through the windows, painting the room in soft gold, Miranda lay in her husband's arms, utterly transformed. Society had predicted disappointment. Instead, she had discovered a passion more profound than any she had imagined possible. In the aftermath, as fear of misjudgment dissolved into joy, one can't help but fear missing such uplifting truths. If this quiet victory moves you, subscribe instantly to never lose these stories. Or, if you'd forsake them, comment your reasons and lament the beauty left behind. In the weeks that followed, the change was unmistakable. Barnaby carried himself with a new assurance, not born of arrogance, but of a man who finally understood his own worth. Miranda glowed beside him, her happiness radiating in every smile, every touch of his hand. At assemblies and gatherings, their connection was palpable. The way they leaned toward each other, the private glances that spoke volumes, the contentment that needed no announcement. The whispers began to shift. Lady Thornbury fell conspicuously silent. Others observed the couple with dawning confusion, then grudging respect. How could a marriage so soundly condemned bloom into such evident joy? Perhaps, some began to whisper, they had misjudged the quiet Earl. Perhaps true strength manifested in ways they had failed to recognize. Miranda stood in the morning room months later, watching Barnaby work at his desk, his profile etched in sunlight. He looked up, caught her gaze, and smiled, a smile full of intimate knowledge and enduring love. Society had tried to define him by their limited understanding, but she knew the truth. As dawn had lit the manor on that first morning as husband and wife, Miranda understood what the ton was only now beginning to see. True manhood blooms not in noise, but in depth. And Barnaby Pottinger, Earl of Bloxley, possessed depths that would take a lifetime to explore, a lifetime she intended to spend proving that the quietest hearts often beat the strongest.